It had been years since the war ended, and life for David had settled into a quiet routine. He lived on a peaceful colony on a distant planet, far from the battles and chaos that had defined his past. The days were calm, and the nights were filled with the sound of crickets and the gentle breeze of the planet's twin moons. David had long put aside his military uniform, trading it for the life of a civilian. But no matter how hard he tried to forget, the memories of the war, of the battles he fought, and the faces of those he had saved never fully left him. One evening, as he sat in his small home, drinking coffee and reading a book, the sudden hum of his communication device broke the silence. The screen flickered to life, displaying a message marked urgent. David set the book aside, a knot forming in his stomach. He hadn't received a message like this in years. The sender was unknown, but there was something strangely familiar about the message. The message read, "I need your help, David. Please, it's urgent. I remember you." The words struck him like a punch to the chest. He read them again, his mind racing. The voice, though faint and distorted, was unmistakable. It was her Princess Selena, the alien princess he had saved during the war. It had been a symbol of hope for her people, but in the chaos of the war, their paths had crossed only once. David had never expected to hear from her again, let alone be called for help. The memory of that day flooded back. It was in the heat of battle, when David's unit was surrounded by enemy forces. The princess had been captured by an opposing faction, a prize for their leaders. But when David had seen her, chained and bruised, he didn't hesitate. He had risked everything to free her, even though it meant breaking all the rules. He had never expected to see her again, but now, here she was, calling for his help. David's fingers hovered over the communication device. He hesitated. The wars were over. He was no longer a soldier, and a new life now, a quiet life, far from the battlefield. But he couldn't ignore the message. The princess, once a symbol of hope, was in trouble. She was asking for him. He knew this was no ordinary request. This was her, the woman he had once risked everything for. The woman who, despite everything, had never forgotten him. David's heart raced as he made the decision. He couldn't turn his back on her now. He had to go. He had to help. Without a second thought, David grabbed his jacket, gathered a few supplies, and made his way to the colony's small landing bay. He didn't know where she was or what kind of danger she was in, but he couldn't ignore her plea. He boarded his ship, the familiar hum of the engines filling the air as he set course for the unknown. As the ship soared into the night sky, David couldn't help but think of the past. He thought about the princess, her dark eyes, and the way she had looked at him when he saved her. It was a look he could never forget, a look of gratitude, but also something more, something deeper. He had never asked for more from her, but he couldn't deny the feeling that had stirred in him that day. The journey was long. David's mind kept drifting back to the princess, wondering what had happened to her since the war. The galaxy had been in chaos after the conflict ended, and many had lost everything. Her people, the Eldraki, had been one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. But after the war, they had been shattered. The princess had disappeared, and the Eldraki had faded into the background. David had assumed she was gone forever, lost in the winds of war. But now, here she was, reaching out to him. Hours passed, and the stars outside the ship's window slowly shifted. David didn't know where he was headed, only that he had to get there. He couldn't let the princess down. He couldn't let her suffer alone. As the ship cut through the dark void of space, David felt a sense of purpose fill him. He was doing the right thing. But the questions lingered in his mind. What had happened to her? Why was she calling him? And why now, after all these years? Finally, the ship broke through the atmosphere of a small, war-torn planet. The coordinates the princess had sent him were only a few hours away as he descended into the planet's atmosphere. A sense of unease settled in his chest. This planet had been the site of some of the fiercest battles during the war. The memories of those days, the violence, the loss, came rushing back. David gripped the controls tightly as the ship descended into the rocky terrain below. His heart beat faster as the ship neared the ground. He was about to meet her again, the princess who had once been a beacon of hope for her people. But now, she was a stranger in need, wounded and in danger. David had no idea what awaited him, but he knew one thing for sure: he would not leave her behind again. As the ship touched down, David took a deep breath and opened the hatch. The cold air hit him immediately, and the harsh landscape stretched out before him. He was alone now, but he felt her presence, somehow her memory, the bond they had shared. It was as if she was still with him, guiding him toward what lay ahead. David didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't turn back. The past had come calling, and he was ready to face it, no matter the cost. David stepped out of the ship, feeling the harsh wind on his face. The air was dry, and the ground beneath his boots was cracked and barren. The planet's surface was nothing like the lush green world he had come from. It was a place of struggle, where every day was a fight for survival. The ruins of old buildings lay scattered around him, evidence of the battles that had once raged here. He adjusted the strap of his bag, which contained the supplies he had gathered, and checked the coordinates. On his wrist device, the princess's message had given him very little information. She had simply asked for help, leaving him to figure out the rest. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he couldn't turn back now. As David made his way through the desolate landscape, his mind wandered to the past. He remembered the day he had saved Princess Selena. It had been a dangerous time. The war had torn the galaxy apart, and everyone was on edge. But there was something about her strength, her calmness, even in the face of danger, that had drawn him in. She was a leader, a symbol of hope for her people. Yet beneath that strength, he had seen a vulnerable side of her, one that he couldn't forget. David had never expected to see her again. After that day, their paths had gone separate ways. He had returned to his life, and she had returned to her people. The war had ended, and for a while he had pushed all thoughts of her aside. But now, here he was, on a strange planet, searching for the princess he had once saved. The path ahead was unclear. The landscape was a maze of rocky hills and dark caves. David kept his senses sharp, knowing that danger could come from any direction. He had no idea what had happened to the princess since their last meeting. The war had taken everything from her people, and he feared the worst. Hours passed as David navigated through the rough terrain. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. It was getting late, and he needed to find shelter soon. Thought about turning back, but the thought of leaving the princess behind was too much. He couldn't abandon her now, not after everything they had been through. Finally, David saw something in the distance, what appeared to be a ruined building, half buried in the sand. He quickened his pace, hoping it might provide some shelter. For the night, as he approached, he noticed signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dirt, a small fire pit, and the faint smell of cooking food. Someone had been here recently. David moved cautiously, his hand resting on the sidearm he had brought with him for protection. He didn't know who or what he would find, but he was prepared for anything. As he rounded the corner of the building, he spotted a figure standing near the edge of the ruins. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothing, her face hidden beneath a hood. She was watching him closely, her stance alert. For a moment, David froze. His heart raced. Was this her? He finally found her? He couldn't tell, but there was something familiar about her posture, the way she moved. "Who are you?" David asked, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward slowly, her eyes never leaving his. As she came closer, the dim light revealed her face. It was her, Princess Selena. She looked different, her clothes were torn, and her face was pale from the injuries she had sustained. But it was unmistakably her. David couldn't believe his eyes. She was alive. After all this time, she was standing right in front of him. His heart skipped a beat as he took a step toward her. "Selena," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I came as soon as I got your message. Are you all right?" The princess gave him a weak smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft but tinged with pain. "I wasn't sure you would." David's chest tightened as he looked at her. She had been through so much, and yet she still carried herself with a quiet dignity. It was clear that she was hurting, both physically and emotionally. "What happened?" David asked gently, moving closer to her. He wanted to help, to do anything he could to make her pain go away. Selina looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "My people, they betrayed me," she said, her voice shaky. "The ones I trusted, they turned on me. Wanted to use me as leverage in the war. And they couldn't, they left me to die." David felt a surge of anger rise within him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could anyone treat her like this? She was a leader, a symbol of hope. She didn't deserve this. "They thought I was dead," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I survived. And now, I need your help, David. I don't know who else to turn to." David took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. He couldn't let his anger take control. "You're not alone, Selina. I'll help you. Whatever it takes," she nodded slowly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. David moved closer, gently supporting her as they began to walk deeper into the ruins. The night was cold, and the air smelled of dust and decay. But for the first time in a long while, David felt a sense of purpose. He had a mission now to protect the princess, to help her heal, and to find out who had betrayed her and why. As they walked, Selina leaned against him for support, and for a brief moment, the world felt as it had once before, when they were allies, when they had fought together. But now, the stakes were higher, and the danger was real. David didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when she needed him. The night was quiet, the only sound being the crunch of David's boots on the rocky ground as he carefully guided the princess through the ruins. She was walking slowly, her strength fading with each step, though she tried to hide it, the pain. And her face was clear. Her once pristine attire, the fine clothing she had worn as royalty, was now torn and stained with blood. Her skin was pale, and her eyes, though determined, held a deep sadness that David couldn't ignore. As they moved deeper into the abandoned building, David could see that this place had been used for something important. The walls were marked, with strange symbols, signs of an ancient civilization. It was clear that this had once been a thriving hub, but now it was just a shadow of its former self. The planet had been torn apart by war, and the ruins were all that remained. David helped Selina to a small makeshift bed in a corner of the building. She collapsed onto it with a sigh of relief, though she winced as her body hit the hard surface. Her injuries were more severe than he had realized. Her side was wrapped in a blood-stained cloth, and her face had bruises and cuts from the attack. She had clearly been through a great deal. "Are you sure you're okay?" David asked softly, kneeling beside her. He tried to keep his voice calm, but worry was thick in his tone. "We need to clean these wounds before they get worse." Selina nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I've been worse," she whispered. "But I didn't think I would survive this time." Her voice trembled slightly, and David could tell it took a lot for her to admit it. She had always been a fighter, strong and proud, but now she seemed so fragile. David wasn't sure how to comfort her. He had always been good at protecting people, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was someone who had trusted him, someone who had been abandoned. The guilt from his past crept into his mind. He had left her once. Would he fail her again? "Don't think like that," he said gently, brushing her hair back from her face. "You're going to be all right. I won't let anything happen to you." Selina met his eyes then, her gaze soft but full of sorrow. "I trusted them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I trusted the ones who promised to protect me. But when I needed them most, they betrayed me. They left me to die." Clenched his fists, fighting the anger that flared up in him. "Who did this to you, Selina? Who betrayed you?" She shook her head, her expression haunted. "I don't know for sure. Could have been anyone in my inner circle. The people I trusted the most, the ones closest to me. They knew I had valuable information about the future of my people, about the war. I think they wanted to use me as a pawn. When they couldn't, they left me to fend for myself. David felt a chill run down his spine. He knew the politics of the galaxy could be cold, but to betray someone like this, it was unforgivable. His mind raced with thoughts of who might have done it, but he couldn't focus on that now. First, he needed to help her heal. He looked around the room, taking in the sparse surroundings. It wasn't much, but he could make do with some. Medical equipment on the far wall, old but functional. It was a small relief to find something that could help. He moved toward it and began preparing to treat her wounds. As he worked, he could feel Selina's eyes on him. She said nothing, but there was something in her gaze, something soft, almost vulnerable. He had seen that look in her eyes before, back when they first met. But now, it was different. Now it wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something unspoken. He couldn't deny that he felt it too, but he didn't want to push her too hard, not after everything she had been through. David carefully cleaned the cuts on her face, trying to be gentle. As he did, Selina flinched slightly, but didn't say anything. He could tell it hurt, but she was strong. She had always been strong, even when she didn't have to be. David admired that about her. He admired her courage, her resilience. Once he had cleaned her wounds and bandaged her up as best he could, he sat down beside her, exhausted. He'd expected this mission to be difficult, but he hadn't expected how much it would affect him. Emotionally, Selina was someone he had once risked everything for. Now seeing her like this, so broken and vulnerable, it felt like a punch to the gut. "You're doing great," he said quietly, offering her a small smile. "We'll get through this." Selina gave him a faint smile in return, though it was clear she was still in pain. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. "After everything, you should hate me." David shook his head, surprised by her words. "Why would I hate? You? You're not the one who betrayed anyone. You're the one who's been betrayed. And you're still standing." He paused, his voice growing more serious. "I owe you. I'll protect you, Selina, no matter what." Her eyes softened as she looked at him, and for a moment the weight of the galaxy seemed to disappear between them. There was no war, no betrayal, no danger. There was just the two of them, sharing a moment of peace amidst the chaos. "I don't know what will happen next," Selina said, her voice growing quiet. "I don't know how much longer I can keep running. But I do know one thing. I trust you, David." The words hit him like a wave. She trusted him. After everything, after the years of separation and the pain she had endured, she still trusted him. David took a deep breath and nodded. The hours passed, and the night grew colder. David sat beside Selina, watching her as she slept. She had fallen into a light, restless sleep, her body still fighting the injuries she had suffered. The dim light from the small fire flickered in the corner of the room, casting long shadows on the cracked walls. David could hear her breathing steadily, but every now and then she would stir, a sign that the pain was still there, lingering just below the surface. David's mind was racing. He had come here to help her, but the more he learned about her situation, the more questions he had. Who had betrayed her? How had they done it? How had she managed to survive so much? He couldn't stop thinking about the war, about the time. When they had first met, the galaxy had been at war, and he had been a soldier, doing his duty. But meeting Selina had changed everything. She had been more than just a princess to him. She had been a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a dark time. Back then, he had thought she was untouchable, someone who would always be safe, always protected by her people. But now she was lying here, injured, alone, and betrayed by those she had trusted most. David got up quietly and walked to the small window, looking out over the barren landscape. The wind howled outside, carrying the sounds of distant battles and the echoes of a broken world. He wondered if the galaxy would ever truly heal from the scars of war. He wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. Selina had been a part of something bigger than herself, and now she was caught in the aftermath. He turned back to the bed where she lay. The faint light from the fire caught her face, highlighting the soft curve of her jaw and the dark circles under her eyes. She looked so fragile, so far removed from the powerful figure she once was. But even in her weakness, there was still strength in her. David walked back to her side, and sat down again, watching her closely. She shifted slightly in her sleep, her brow furrowing as though she were dreaming. After a moment, her eyes fluttered open and she stared up at him, her gaze cloudy at first. When her eyes focused, she smiled faintly. David, ... double quotes, she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Oh, you're still here." "Of course I am," David replied, his voice calm, but full of emotion. "I told you I wouldn't leave you." She looked at him for a moment, as though trying to make sense of his words. Then her expression softened, and she sighed, her eyes closing briefly. "I've been running for so long," Selina murmured. "I thought I could escape it all, but I couldn't. Not after what happened to my people." David listened intently, leaning forward slightly. "What happened to your people, Selina? I need to know. I need to understand." She opened her eyes and looked at him again, her gaze deep and searching. For a moment she said nothing, her thoughts clearly weighing on her. Then, with a quiet sigh, she began to speak. "The war ended a long time ago," she started, her voice distant as though the memory was still fresh in her mind. "My people were scattered, broken. We lost so much. The galaxy was in ruins. My family, my parents, were killed during the final battle. I was supposed to take over, to lead what was left of my people. But it wasn't that simple." David's heart sank as he listened to her. He had known her as a princess, a leader. But hearing her speak of loss like this, it was a side of her he had never seen. It made her feel even more real, more human in a way he hadn't expected. "I was young," Selina continued, her eyes distant. "Too young to take on the responsibility of an entire species. And that's when the betrayal began, the ones closest. To me, the advisors, the generals began to fight for power. They saw my weakness and tried to use me. At first they promised me protection, but it was all lies." David's mind raced. He could feel the anger building inside him. To think that anyone would take advantage of her like this, it was unforgivable. "Why didn't you fight back?" David asked quietly. "Why didn't you stop them?" Selina's eyes were filled with sorrow as she looked at him. "I tried," she whispered, "but they were too strong. They had too much power. I was alone, David. There was no one I could trust. They told me to stay quiet, to stay out of the way, or else... I would end up like my parents." David clenched his fists, the urge to protect her rising up inside him. "But you're here now. You survived. You're not alone anymore." She gave him a sad smile, her lips barely moving. "I don't know how I did it. I ran, I hid, and somehow... found the strength to survive. But I've been running for so long, David, I can't do it alone anymore." David's heart swelled with emotion. He had never seen this side of Selina. She had always been so strong, so sure of herself. But now he could see the weight of the world on her shoulders. "You don't have to run anymore," David said softly, his voice filled with determination. "I'm here, and I won't let anyone hurt you again, I promise." Selina's eyes welled up with tears, though she quickly blinked them away. She had been so strong for so long, but now in this quiet moment, she allowed herself to break down. "I'm scared, David," she whispered. "I'm so scared. I don't know who I can trust." David took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "You can trust me, Selina. You've always been able to." For the first time in a long while, Selina allowed herself to feel safe. She closed her eyes, leaning back against the bed as a single tear slid down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. David sat beside her, watching over her as she drifted back to sleep. He knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. The quiet of the ruined building was broken by the distant sound of engines, heavy, mechanical, and unmistakably military. David's head snapped toward the doorway. His heart skipped a beat. He had hoped that they might have some time to rest. But it seemed that fate had other plans. "They're here," Selina whispered, her voice filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "They found me." David looked at her, his mind racing. He had expected danger to follow them, but he hadn't anticipated how soon it would come. The soldiers she had spoken of, the ones who had betrayed her, were now closing in. They had tracked her across the galaxy, and now they had found her again. "We need to move," David said, his voice firm. He didn't wait for a response, instead quickly checking the room for any signs of escape. The ruins around them offered little in the way of shelter, but there had to be something they could use. Selina looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. She wasn't used to running not like this. She had always been a princess, a leader. She had been the one who made the decisions, who gave the orders. But now she was no longer the ruler of an empire. She was a fugitive, alone and hunted. "I can't," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't run anymore. I'm too weak." David knelt beside her, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice soft but filled with determination. "I'm here. We'll get through this together, but we need to go now." For a moment, Selina hesitated. She didn't want to run again. She had spent so much of her life running, fleeing from her enemies, hiding from her past. But David's words, his steady presence, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face this alone. With a deep breath, she nodded. "All right, let's go." David helped her to her feet, his arm around her waist for support. She winced in pain, but she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. They both knew the danger was real, and they had no time to waste. They moved quickly, slipping out of the ruined building and into the shadows. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the sounds of pursuit. David's ears strained, listening for any sign of the enemy. They were getting closer, and soon they would be caught in the open if they didn't find cover. "We need to get to the forest," David said, his voice low. "It's our best chance." Selina nodded, her face grim. She had heard of the forest, a dense, treacherous area on the outskirts of the ruined city. It was dangerous, filled with wild creatures and unpredictable terrain. But it was their only hope. The two of them moved swiftly through the desolate streets, staying in the shadows, doing their best to avoid being seen. David's mind raced. As he thought about their next move, he had always been trained to fight, to protect, but now he had something more to fight for. He had someone to protect, someone who meant more to him than anything else in the galaxy. As they reached the edge of the city, the sound of engines grew louder. The enemy was closing in fast. David could see the outline of the forest in the distance, dark and foreboding, but their only refuge. He urged Selina to keep moving, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the approaching soldiers. Just as they reached the tree line, a loud crack echoed through the air. A shot had been fired. David's heart raced. They had been spotted. "Go," he shouted, pushing Selina toward the forest. "Run." Without thinking, he turned to face the enemy. The soldiers were just a few yards away now, their weapons trained. On him, David wasn't sure if they were going to shoot or if they just wanted to capture him. Either way, he wasn't going to give them the chance to take Selina. He ducked behind a large tree, his pulse pounding in his ears. The soldiers were coming closer, their voices growing louder as they gave orders to search the area. David held his breath, waiting for the right moment. From the corner of his eye, he saw Selina, now a few yards ahead, running toward the dense underbrush of the forest. She was still weak, but she was determined. David knew he had to act quickly, couldn't let them get to her. With a deep breath, he sprang from his hiding place, running toward the soldiers. He fired a few quick shots, hoping to distract them, long enough for Selina to escape. He didn't want to hurt anyone, but he knew this was the only way. The enemy was relentless, and they would stop at nothing to capture her. The soldiers fired back, but David was faster, more agile. He darted between the trees, using the forest to his advantage. The soldiers hesitated, unsure of their surroundings. The terrain was unfamiliar. The dense trees made it hard to see. David's heart pounded in his chest as he kept moving, trying to stay ahead of the enemy. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long. He needed to regroup with Selina and get out of there. After what felt like an eternity, David finally spotted Selina again. She was crouched behind a cluster of trees, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She had made it further into the forest, but she was still vulnerable. David reached her side, his eyes scanning the area. The soldiers were still following, but they were farther behind now. "We need to keep moving," he said urgently. "We can't stop here." Selina nodded, her face pale but determined. She didn't say anything, but David could see the gratitude in her eyes. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. They moved deeper into the forest, their footsteps quick and silent. The danger was far from over, but for the first time since they had started running, Naveed allowed himself to believe they might actually make it out alive. But as the trees closed in around them, Naveed knew one thing for certain: they weren't safe yet. The pursuit had only just begun. The forest was thick with shadows, the trees standing tall like silent watchers. David and Selina had made it deeper into the wilderness, but they couldn't stop moving. Every step they took felt heavier, weighed down by the reality of their situation. They were still being hunted, still running from the enemies who wanted to capture Selina. But the further they went, the more David felt the pressure of their journey. It wasn't just about escaping anymore, it was about surviving. And keeping her safe? "Are you okay?" David asked quietly, glancing at Selina as they walked through the thick underbrush. Her pace had slowed, and her breath was uneven, but she kept moving, not saying a word. Her side, still wrapped in makeshift bandages, was clearly causing her pain, but she didn't want to show it. "I'm fine," Selina replied, her voice soft but firm. She was trying to stay strong, but David could hear the strain in her words. "I can keep going." David didn't believe her, but he said nothing. He knew it wasn't the time to argue. They had to keep going. Soldiers were still searching for them, and if they stopped for even a moment, they would be caught. There was no telling how many soldiers were out there. Selina's enemies weren't just going to give up. They pushed forward, through the thick forest and over rocky terrain. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional snap of a twig beneath their feet. The air was cool, but the tension between them was thick, and neither of them spoke much. The journey was taking a toll on both of them, mentally and physically. Eventually, as the hours passed, David spotted something ahead. A small clearing in the forest, with a stream running through it. It wasn't much, but it was a chance to rest, to regroup, and to catch their breath. David glanced at Selina, who had slowed to a near crawl. Her face was pale, and her eyes were dark with exhaustion. "We need to rest," David said firmly. "Just for a little while." Selina shook her head, her expression unreadable. "We can't stop. They'll find us." "They won't," David said, trying to reassure her. "We're not staying here long. It's just long enough to regain some strength." She hesitated, but finally nodded. David could see the weariness in her eyes, the quiet acceptance of her situation. She was tired, but she wouldn't admit it. Wouldn't show weakness. They made their way to the clearing, where David helped her sit by the edge of the stream. The water was cool and clear, running over smooth stones. The peaceful sound of the stream was a sharp contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. David knelt down beside her, his mind still racing. There was so much more to this than just running. He had no idea where they could go next. He didn't even know how to protect her from what was coming. Now the enemies who had betrayed her weren't going to stop. They wouldn't rest until she was in their control. "We have to keep moving," Selina said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll come for us." "No," David replied, his voice tight. "But we need to figure out what to do next. Can't keep running forever." For a moment, there was silence. Both of them knew the truth. Running wasn't a permanent solution. Sooner or later, they would have to face her enemies. They would have to fight back. And David didn't know if they were ready for that. "You don't have to do this alone," David said after a long pause, his voice low. "I'm with you, Selina. Whatever comes next, I'll be by your side." Selina's eyes softened as she looked at him. There was a moment of quiet understanding between them, a connection that went beyond words. She had always been strong, always relied on herself. But now, for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to lean on someone else. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she whispered, her voice filled with vulnerability. "I thought I could do it, but it's too much." David reached out, taking her hand in his. You don't have to be alone, not while I'm here. Selena squeezed his hand, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They both knew the road ahead would be difficult, but at least for now, they had each other. The moment was brief. As much as they needed to rest, they couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. The danger was still out there, and Selena's enemies would not stop until they found her. David stood up, offering her his hand. We need to go, he said. But we'll get through this. We'll find a way to stop them. Anna hesitated for a moment, looking at him as though searching for something. Then, slowly, she stood, accepting his hand. I don't know what's ahead, but thank you, David, for everything. David gave her a reassuring smile, though the weight of their situation pressed heavily on his chest. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. Together, they gathered what little they had, preparing to continue their journey. The forest stretched out before them, dark and endless, but they were no longer alone in it. They had each other, and that was enough for now. As they moved forward into the unknown, David couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he would fight for her. He would protect her, no matter what. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead.